The crystal flute felt cold against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the warmth that should have filled the private dining room of Boston's most exclusive restaurant. To my daughter, Sophie, my husband, Richard, began his toast, his voice smooth as the aged whiskey he favored. He stood at the head of the table, a portrait of success in his tailored suit, his smile catching the light. We were here to celebrate Sophie's graduation from Harvard Law, the culmination of years of dedication, both hers and mine. 50 of our closest friends and family watched him, their faces beaming. But as he spoke, a chill snaked its way up my spine. Sophie has learned that to succeed, one must be willing to shed the old to make way for the new, he continued, his eyes, for a fleeting second, locking with mine, to leave behind what no longer serves a purpose. No matter how long it has been a part of your life. The air thickened. A few people shifted in their seats. A subtle current of unease rippling through the room. Sophie's smile faltered, her brow furrowing slightly as she glanced from him to me. She knew her father's penchant for dramatic flair. But this felt different. This felt personal. This felt cruel. For 28 years, I had been the bedrock of his life, the silent partner in the firm of Richard Davenport. I was Elena Davenport, 54 years old, and my identity had been meticulously crafted around his needs. I had shelved my own ambitions of opening a financial consultancy firm to support his 3 failed startups, his midlife crisis pivot to art dealing, and his endless quest for self-discovery. I had raised our brilliant daughter, managing our finances with a surgeon's precision to ensure her future was secure, even when Richard's ventures left us perilously close to the edge. And so, Richard raised his glass higher, his voice booming with a false sense of triumph. As Sophie embarks on her new life, I too, have decided it is time to start mine. Without Elena. Silence. It was not a quiet hush, but a deafening void, sucking the very air from the room. The clinking of a fork against a plate echoed like a gunshot. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled to me. A macabre audience awaiting the inevitable breakdown, the tears, the accusations, the dramatic flight. They expected a scene. In the corner, I saw Chloe, his much younger protégée, her gaze fixed on her lap, a faint blush creeping up her neck. Our friends, the same ones who sat at this table, had known. Her presence at our Christmas party, her calls to me for career advice. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. For a moment, a wave of hot shame washed over me. He had planned this public execution of our marriage, to humiliate me into submission. But beneath the shock, a cold, hard resolve began to solidify. An anchor in the storm. I had seen this coming, not the theatricality, perhaps, but the intent. For months, I had been living in a separate reality, playing the part of the unsuspecting wife while meticulously preparing for this exact moment. I took a slow, deliberate breath, my trembling hands hidden beneath the damask tablecloth. I met his triumphant gaze, and I smiled. It wasn't a large smile, but it was genuine, and its effect was immediate. His own smile wavered, a crack in his confident facade. "Congratulations, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying across the silent room, "on your newfound courage." With practiced calm, I reached into my handbag. It wasn't a clutch, but a structured leather satchel, my briefcase. My armor. From it, I pulled a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp bearing my initials. I rose from my chair, smoothed the silk of my dress, and walked the length of the table to where he stood. Frozen, I placed the envelope gently on the table beside his untouched plate of food. "What's this?" he asked, his voice losing its baritone boom, replaced by a note of confusion. "Something to commemorate the occasion," I replied softly. I turned to my daughter, whose face was a mask of pale shock and horror. I cupped her cheek, my thumb stroking away a single tear that had escaped. "I am so proud of you, my love," I whispered, for her ears only. "This day is yours. Don't let him take it from you." Then, I addressed our stunned guests. "Please, enjoy the celebration. Richard is picking up the tab." With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I did not run. I did not look back. My head was high, my spine straight. Each step, a reclamation of the dignity he had tried to strip from me. The heavy oak door swung shut behind me, muffling the eruption of frantic whispers. The cool Boston evening air hit my face, a welcome balm. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, I felt like I could breathe. The sound of the restaurant door being thrown open echoed behind me, followed by Richard's voice, now shrill with panic. "Elena, what the hell is in this envelope? What have you done?" I kept walking toward the valet, a small, triumphant smile finally gracing my lips. The envelope didn't just contain divorce papers. It contained the beginning of the end of his carefully constructed world. It contained a copy of the first page of a prenuptial agreement he had insisted we sign 28 years ago. And it contained a single, high-resolution photograph of the hidden ledger where he had meticulously, foolishly, documented his own downfall. His frantic shouts faded behind me as I slid into the waiting town car. I didn't return to our house in Beacon Hill, the stately brownstone filled with ghosts of a life I now realized was a carefully curated illusion. Instead, I had the driver take me to the small, discreet apartment I had rented under my maiden name 3 weeks ago. It was my war room. The journey was a blur of city lights painting, fleeting patterns across my face. My mind was not on the present, but on the past 3 months. A period of quiet, methodical unraveling. It began, as it so often does, with a small thread of doubt. Richard had always handled his own passion projects, but I managed the core of our family's finances. It was a partnership, or so I believed. He was the visionary, I was the pragmatist. But then I noticed irregularities. Small sums vanishing from a joint investment account into a holding company I'd never heard of. When I questioned him, he was dismissively charming. "Just some creative tax strategy. Darling, you know how these things are. Let me handle the complex stuff." He patted my hand. His condescending smile, a weapon I was only just learning to recognize. For a man who had relied on my financial acumen to bail out his failed businesses, his sudden secrecy was a blaring alarm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to his study, a room paneled in dark mahogany that always smelled of leather and accomplishment. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just a loose thread to pull. I started with his files, expecting to find digital trails. I hired a discreet forensic accountant, a former FBI agent, who confirmed my fears. Richard was moving money, systematically, to an account in the Cayman Islands. It was a digital fortress, designed to be impenetrable. For a week, I felt a knot of despair tightening in my chest. He was smarter than I thought. He had built a wall I couldn't climb. My meticulously gathered evidence of his affair with Chloe. The credit card statements for jewelry I never received and dinners I never attended would trigger the fidelity clause in our prenup. But the hidden money our shared future seemed lost. I felt a surge of fear, a real and terrifying possibility that he could win, leaving me with just the house and a fraction of what was rightfully mine. The breakthrough came not from brilliance, but from sheer, clumsy frustration. One night, drowning in paperwork at his large antique desk. I reached for a box of old tax returns from the top shelf of the built-in bookcase, hoping to find a clue in past declarations. The step stool wobbled. I lost my balance, and the heavy box of files crashed to the floor, spilling a decade's worth of paper across the Persian rug. As I knelt to clean up the mess, my hand brushed against the underside of the bottom drawer of the desk, which had been jolted open by the impact. I felt a slight ridge, a seam. My breath caught. With trembling fingers, I pried at it, and a slim, hidden drawer slid open with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a single object, a slim, leather-bound ledger. It was the kind of elegant, old-world journal one might use for poetry or personal reflections. His initials, R.D., were embossed in gold on the cover. My heart pounded against my ribs as I opened it. It was not poetry. The first few pages contained meticulously neat columns of dates, amounts, and transfer codes. A secret history of our finances. It was a parallel set of books, documenting every dollar he had siphoned into his offshore haven. But it was the notes scrawled in the margins in his familiar, arrogant script that shattered me. Next to a $20, 000 transfer, deposit on the Cape Cod property. Chloe will love the ocean view. A new house for a new life. Next to a charge from a high-end jeweler, E is questioning my spending. Had to invent a story about a market downturn. The way she nods. So trusting. It's a weakness I almost pity. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just a record of theft. It was a diary of his contempt. I flipped through the pages. Each entry a fresh stab of betrayal. He detailed his plans, his conversations with Chloe, his irritation with my presence. The final entry, dated only 2 days prior, was the cruelest of all. The stage is set for Sophie's graduation dinner. It's the perfect venue. A public announcement. Clean. Swift. Elena won't dare cause a scene in front of our daughter and all those people. She's too concerned with appearances. By the time she recovers, I'll be gone. And the money will be untouchable. The end of an era. The beginning of my real life. I closed the book. A wave of nausea washing over me. The pain was so intense it was physical. A cold, heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. The man I had loved, the father of my child, had viewed our life together as an era to be ended, and me as a pathetic obstacle to be managed. The tears that I had held back for months finally came, hot and silent. But as I sat there on the floor, surrounded by the debris of my shattered marriage, something shifted. The grief curdled into a cold, diamond-hard fury. This ledger was not just proof. It was a confession. The offshore account was a fortress. Yes, but he had just handed me the key. Intent to defraud. That was the legal term. It was a crime that pierced any corporate veil or offshore shield. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had committed, calculated, criminal fraud against his partner of 28 years. His weakness wasn't my trust, it was his own arrogance. His need to document his triumph. I took a picture of the most damning page with my phone, the one with the graduation plan. Then I carefully placed the ledger in my satchel. The tears stopped. My hands grew steady. I had my weapon. The game had changed. The following 3 days were a masterclass in controlled chaos, all orchestrated from my temporary command center. My first call was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Margaret, who had been on retainer for the past month. I forwarded her the photo of the ledger page and the details of the Cayman Islands account. The photo establishes clear intent to defraud, she said, her voice grimly satisfied. We file for an emergency asset freeze first thing in the morning. He won't be able to touch a dime of marital property by breakfast. My second call was to my daughter. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. "Mom, where are you, Dad is?" "He's losing his mind. He's telling everyone you've gone mad, that you're having some kind of breakdown." "I'm fine. Sophie, I'm safe," I assured her. My voice softer now. I explained everything, my voice breaking only once when I described the words in the ledger. I had wanted to protect her, to keep this ugliness from tainting her achievement. But Richard had made that impossible. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold with a fury that mirrored my own. "He didn't just lie to you, Mom. He was lying to me, too. All year. He told me money was tight, that he couldn't help as much with my student loans. I've been working 2 jobs, while he was buying beach houses." The betrayal in her voice was a fresh wound. "I'm coming to you." "No. Sweetheart, stay with your Aunt Isabella tonight," I said. "She knows. She'll explain." Isabella, Richard's older sister, was my final call. She was a history professor at Boston College, a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her fierce loyalty. I had confided in her 2 months ago, and she had been my silent ally ever since. "He did it." "Then," she said, her voice laced with disgust, "the theatrical fool. Bring the ledger. Elena, come to my house. You and Sophie will stay here. Let him rage at an empty house." It was nearly midnight when I heard Richard's car screech to a halt outside the Beacon Hill house. I watched from the window of a discreet car parked across the street as he stormed up the steps and fumbled with his keys. Clearly intoxicated, he slammed the door open, shouting my name into the echoing darkness. A few minutes later, lights flicked on, one by one. As he searched the empty rooms, the sight of his frantic silhouette moving through the home we had built together should have hurt. Instead, it felt like watching a stranger in a movie. 3 hours later, he showed up at Isabella's Cambridge townhouse. His face flushed, his suit rumpled. Chloe trailed behind him like a nervous shadow, her youthful confidence completely gone, replaced by a wide-eyed apprehension. Isabella met them at the door, blocking the entrance with her body. "What do you want?" "Richard, I want to talk to my wife," he seethed, trying to push past her. "She doesn't want to talk to you," Isabella said. Not budging, I appeared in the hallway behind her, with Sophie at my side. The sight of us, a united front, seemed to knock the wind out of him. His anger momentarily gave way to a desperate, wheedling tone. "Elena, darling, this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. You need to call off your lawyer. Unfreeze the accounts. We can sort this out like adults." Sophie stepped forward. An adult wouldn't try to destroy his family at his daughter's graduation dinner, she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You stood there and lied to all of us." Richard's face hardened. "This is between your mother and me. Sophie, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," she shot back. "I understand you were stealing our family's money to fund your little adventure with." "In her." She gestured contemptuously toward Chloe, who flinched as if struck. "Now, listen here," Richard began, his voice rising. But I cut him off. There's nothing left to say. "Richard," I said calmly. I watched his eyes, saw the calculation behind the panic. He was still looking for a weakness to exploit. "This isn't you, Elena," he said, trying a different tack, his voice softening into the persuasive purr that had once charmed me. "You're not this cold. This vindictive... Think of our history. 28 years. I have, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I've thought of little else, especially since I found your little black book. The color drained from his face. Chloe looked from me to him, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. What book? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What is she talking about? Richard. He ignored her. You went through my private things, that's illegal. Not when it's in our shared home. Documenting a criminal conspiracy to defraud me. I countered, my voice like ice. I looked directly at Chloe, a flicker of something akin to pity stirring within me. He wrote about you, too. You know, he called your trust in him a weakness. He almost pitied. He detailed how he would set you up in the Cape Cod house, but only after he was certain all the assets were securely in his name alone. It seems you were just another part of his plan, not a partner. Chloe stared at Richard, her mouth slightly agape. The carefully constructed fantasy she had bought into was shattering before her eyes. The look of betrayal on her face was a mirror of what I had felt just days before. You're a liar, Richard bellowed, finally losing the last shred of his composure. He took a step toward me, his hand raised. Isabella stepped between us instantly. Get out of my house. Richard, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Now, before I call the police and add assault to your growing list of sins. He stood there for a moment, chest heaving, his world crumbling around him. He looked from his sister's implacable face to his daughter's disgusted one, to the wreck of his mistress's illusions, and finally to me, his wife, the woman he had fatally underestimated, defeated. He turned and stalked away, with Chloe stumbling after him. As they left, I saw her turn to him and say something, her face contorted with fury. The first major crack in their brand new life had appeared. Isabella closed the door and turned to us, her expression softening. Well, she said, managing a wry smile. That was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. In that moment, surrounded by my daughter and my sister-in-law, I didn't feel broken. I felt fortified. The preliminary hearing took place in a sterile, impersonal courtroom that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Richard arrived with a lawyer who looked barely old enough to have finished law school, his suit ill-fitting and his expression nervous. It was a budget choice, a clear sign the asset freeze was biting hard. In contrast, my attorney, Margaret, was a vision of calm competence. Our files organized into precise, color-coded tabs. Richard looked haggard. The past few weeks had not been kind to him. He tried to catch my eye as we waited. Espérate, pleading look on his face. But I focused on the documents in front of me, refusing to give him an opening. The judge was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the emergency petition and the key pieces of evidence Margaret had submitted: the prenup, the bank statements, and a certified copy of the ledger. Mr. Davenport, the judge said, her voice cutting through the quiet room as she peered over her glasses at Richard. This ledger, in your own handwriting, details a systematic plan to move marital assets into an undisclosed offshore account with the specific intent of hiding them from your wife during a planned separation. Is that correct? Richard's young lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, we contest the provenance of that document. Do you? The judge interrupted, her gaze unwavering, because a handwriting expert has already verified it is a match to the signature on this prenuptial agreement, which, I might add, contains one of the most ironclad fidelity and financial disclosure clauses I have ever seen. Section 14. B. Any attempt by either party to knowingly conceal, divert, or fraudulently transfer marital assets shall result in a forfeiture of that party's claim to said assets. She looked back at Richard. You seem to have drafted a contract for your own destruction. Mr. Davenport. The color drained from his face. The judge ruled swiftly. The asset freeze would be made permanent, pending the final divorce decree. The Beacon Hill house was granted to me for my exclusive use, and Richard was ordered to have no contact with me outside of legal correspondence. His attempt to portray me as an unstable, vindictive woman had crumbled into dust against the cold. Hard evidence of his own meticulous planning. As we left the courtroom, he cornered me in the hallway. Elena. Please. He whispered, his voice hoarse. Don't do this. I'll give it all back. We can work something out. The time for working something out was before you decided to publicly humiliate me and criminally defraud me. Richard, I said, my voice low and steady. I walked away, leaving him slumped against the marble wall. A man finally facing the consequences of his own arrogance. The weeks that followed were a quiet storm of legal proceedings and social fallout. News of the ledger, the diary of a scoundrel, as Isabella cheekily called it, spread like wildfire through our social circle. Friends who had offered him sympathetic pats on the back at the graduation dinner now crossed the street to avoid him. His art-dealing business, which I now realized was more of a vanity project funded by our joint accounts than a real enterprise, began to collapse. 2 weeks after the hearing, Isabella called me, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. You'll never guess who I just saw hauling boxes out of Richard's temporary apartment. Chloe. Apparently, a man with no access to his money and a looming fraud investigation isn't the romantic hero she signed up for. She told a mutual friend he was all talk, and that she wasn't going to go down with a sinking ship. I felt a strange pang. Not of pity for Richard, but of a sad, universal truth. He had built his new life on a foundation of lies, and it had crumbled at the first tremor of reality. Meanwhile, I was building my own new life on a foundation of truth and hard-won expertise. I used my personal savings, money I had carefully kept separate and that Richard had never known about, to lease a small but elegant office space downtown. I hung a simple brass plaque on the door, Davenport Financial Transitions. My mission was clear: to help women navigate the financial turmoil of life's biggest changes: divorce, widowhood, career shifts. My first clients were women who had heard my story and saw a reflection of their own. I wasn't just balancing their books, I was helping them find their footing, reclaim their power, just as I was reclaiming mine. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for what would have been our 29th anniversary. I found the irony fitting. Richard looked like a ghost of the man who had stood so proudly at that graduation dinner. He was thin, pale, and represented himself, having run out of money for even the most basic legal counsel. The judge's decision was a formality. The prenuptial agreement was upheld in its entirety. I was awarded the house, my full retirement accounts, and, due to the fraud and fidelity clauses, 80% of all joint investments, including the full value of the now frozen offshore account. Richard was left with his personal effects, his failing business, and the remaining 20%, an amount that would be largely consumed by legal fees and back taxes. The justice was precise, delivered by the very instrument he had created to protect himself. As I left the courthouse for the last time, he was waiting for me on the steps. Elena, he said, his voice quiet. All the bluster gone. You made a terrible mistake. I know that now. Yes, you did, I said, meeting his gaze. There was no anger left in me, only a vast, quiet emptiness where my love for him used to be. I hope you find happiness, he said, his eyes filled with a weary resignation I had never seen before. You deserve it. It was, I realized, the most honest thing he had said to me in years. 6 months later, my consultancy was thriving. I had hired 2 associates and had a waiting list of clients. Sophie, who had graduated with honors and taken a prestigious job in New York, visited often. "You know," she said one afternoon, looking around my bustling office, "if Dad had just been honest, if he'd just asked for a divorce respectfully, he would have walked away with half of everything. His greed cost him everything." Sometimes, the schemes we think are so clever are the very traps we set for ourselves, I replied, looking at the city skyline through my office window. The woman who had been Richard Davenport's wife had ceased to exist. In her place was Elena Davenport, founder, mentor, and architect of her own life. The ledger he had written to chronicle my downfall had instead become the first chapter in the story of my reinvention. I had not just won a legal battle, I had reclaimed something far more precious myself. If this story of turning betrayal into a new beginning resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rewrite your own story. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell. And please, share your own stories of resilience in the comments below. Your strength can be a beacon for someone else navigating the dark,